Welcome to another show, the Research to Reps Roundtable. I am your co-host, Dr. Coach Pat Ivey. I'm excited about another wonderful podcast we have scheduled here. So let's get to it. First up, I want to say hello to our co-host, Dr. Ernie Rimer. What's happening?
Hey, what's up, Pat, Ted, Tim? We're really excited to have this podcast. Tim, this is way past due. You co-authored the comprehensive integration paper with us, and it's about time we got you on the podcast. We're excited to have you here. Dr. Ted, how you doing?
I'm doing great this afternoon.
Awesome. Well, we'll go ahead and get it started. Tim, if you can just give us a little bit of background. We know you, but some of our listeners may not. So can you tell them who you are, what do you do, and maybe something about research?
Something about research, yeah. Dr. Tim Suchomel. Now I can officially say that I'm an associate professor and the director of the sports science master's program at the University of Pittsburgh. I was at Carroll University for 8 years, working with their master's program, but excited to take the new opportunity here. Something about research. Well, I'm interested in all strength power oriented research. A lot of the stuff that we do is very focused on different training methods and how to improve those characteristics. But as Ernie and I talk about regularly, athlete monitoring is a huge passion of mine as well. And all things related to that. So finding the right metrics and making them work.
That's awesome. Ernie, what makes you so excited about Tim? I know you worked really hard to get him here on the podcast. So what is it?
Well, I think his research and reputation kind of precedes himself. I mean, he has a long history of research in the weight room. And I believe some of the earliest work that I read from Tim and other colleagues was when they were doing some exercise profiling and evaluating different variations of lifts and how they would actually produce the greatest amount of power. For example, I believe Tim and his colleagues published a paper early on different variations of the Olympic poles and whether you did a jump and shrug or a power clean and different types of varieties and which of those variations produce the greatest power. And I do believe they also did that with different loads on the bar for like your common movements like the squats. So I've been reading work from Tim long before I ever met or knew Tim. And so I'm just really kind of giddy and excited to have him here. But Tim, now that you're entering Pitt and knowing some of the resources they have there, like what if you were able to step right in and kind of do whatever research you wanted with those resources, like which direction would you go?
Well, it's a great question. A lot of the data that we have here has just been collected from the athletes over years and years and years. And the benefit that I'd like to actually use that research for that data for is to generate some information on long-term athlete development that we have at the collegiate level. There's some stuff out there, but a lot of the things I'll say that they're dated. They've been out there for a while, but they haven't necessarily given us the information that we want, especially with the types of monitoring that we have, the quality of strength coaches, and everything that we have as well. And also implementing a system not too dissimilar from Louisville in the sense that it's kind of coming from all directions. You have, academics and athletics paired together. Sports medicine is involved, athletic training is involved, and nutrition is involved. So being able to kind of comprehensively put that together and see how athletes are able to develop and kind of assess those different things, especially through, I know there's been some research on the COVID side of things, but especially with the athletes who are sticking around for those extra years, did they truly benefit from the development over the course of that, or did they get to a point where freshman, sophomore year we develop those athletes, but then eventually they kind of plateau. But I think some of that obviously from the performance side of things, but the long-term stuff is really interesting to me, as well as from I'm housed in the neuromuscular research lab with Dr. Brad Nindle, and there's a lot of stuff that we can do from the tactical side of things, as well as still developing or expanding on some of the research that we have from the eccentric side of things. So there's a lot of different directions that we can go. And obviously, with the development of the master's program here and hopefully a PhD program in the future, that's kind of the direction that we kind of want to go with everything. So I'm going to toss things off over to Dr. Pat because I'm curious. So you've obviously been involved with a variety of different programs, now involved with CSCCA. So how do you kind of view merging the ideas between CSCCA, NSCA, and other organizations that are out there to continue to move the strength and conditioning field forward?
That is a really good question. And I've been a proponent of that for a long time. I know that there have been some complications with merging these different organizations and professions. And I think that's part of the business model, any business model, any industry business model, I should say. You know, there is that growth, and then there is expansion, and then there eventually leads to consolidation. I think for organizations to be able to survive, we have to look at these partnerships and how we can collaborate. So I don't know exactly what that means in the future, but if you study trends, you will see that you can't just keep going up and growing and getting bigger. Eventually, you reach this point of diminishing returns where you have to say, okay, how can we bring some things together? And I know, Ted, you've got a lot of experience in the NFL, but it used to be two different leagues, right? And eventually it grew, and then there was consolidation, and then became the National Football League. And I think we will see that. We're seeing that in the collegiate athletics as well, whether it's Power Five, now the Power Four, or if it was the Power Six, if it's the Group of Five, or whatever it might be. How can we look to industry partners? How can we look at hospital systems? How can we look at corporations? I was reading an article, someone's even looking at internationally, how they can fund their NIL internationally. So I think for us, you know, you asked specifically about the CSCCA and the NSCA. I think the leaders of these organizations are seeing that in order for us to continue to thrive, we have to look at opportunities to collaborate. That's a long answer to your question, but I think I wanted to give you just a little bit of background that it's not in isolation that we're operating. This is how trends happen in sports and business. So I will ask Ted, what does he think about NFL, collegiate, high school, strength and conditioning, athletic performance? Ted, what do you see as far as that collaboration and those trends and how organizations can work together?
I think you're seeing some more strength coaches at the NFL level that have both NSCA and CSCCA certifications, and they'd like to continue with both in the event that they move back from the NFL back to the collegiate level. So I think the resources from both those groups, I think the strength coaches I've talked to are still interested in the benefits that each of those organizations, offers them. So, being the president of the CSCCA, Pat, I think you'll figure out a way to make sure that you listen to the ideas of those coaches and figure out the best way to collaborate.
And I think that's a different way of looking at things, Tim. Like, who are we serving? Are we here to make organizations grow and live and be strong? Yes, that needs to happen because they are businesses, but ultimately we're here to serve people. And if you can find ways to meet people's needs and the needs of the strength and conditioning coach or the sports scientist, the athletic performance professional says that they may need opportunities to work in different levels within their field, whether it's professional, collegiate, high school, tactical. I think that's the wave of the future, and organizations that are paying attention to that are going to be the most successful. What do you think about that answer, Tim? We kind of bounced it around a little bit.
No, I like it. I've always kind of thought in my head, I've been more involved with NSCA with, things in the past and everything, and really haven't had the experience of going to CSCCA, but I've heard, nothing but good things. There's good things with both organizations, obviously. But I've always been curious, we have these two big certifications that are out there. Process of getting them aside and everything, they're obviously the dominating certifications within the field, but I've always been curious with people, how they're viewed from either side of things. Well, this person only has a CSCS, or this person has their their SCCC. It's those types of things that I don't think it necessarily needs to be one is necessarily better than the other, because at the end of the day, it's it's a certification. Until we put our certifications into practice, then we truly know what the individual is all about. So I liked your answer in the sense that I want these organizations to work together, because we all have the common goal, and the goal is to develop, really, really good professionals within the field. And don't get me wrong, there's going to be, the bad eggs here and there that have the certifications, and it is what it is. But I think the goal should be, I think it'd be great at some point to have almost I know that we have our the annual events each year, to almost have like a co-event. I think it'd be really interesting especially as we see the growth of the field more and more moving forward. We don't want to limit people to say you have to be this way or you have to be this way, or you're an NSCA person, you're a CSCCA person. I don't think that's the approach that really benefits anybody. So being able to collaborate when we can, I think would be awesome moving forward.
No, I appreciate that. And, like Ted said, my role as president of the CSCCA, I'm still a member and attend the NSCA conferences. I'm still a registered strength and conditioning coach. I think it's value in being in both spaces. So I don't know if anyone should choose if they have the ability to continue to learn and network. For me, that's my driving, I guess, ideology. Ernie, what do you think about it?
Well, I think only good can come from the organizations collaborating. Obviously, they both are nonprofit organizations. So while revenue is important, the purpose of a nonprofit organization is to provide some type of service to the masses in the community. So given that they're both surrounding, athlete health and performance, and under that umbrella, strength and conditioning, I believe that only good can come from them collaborating together. And I really like your thoughts on maybe having a joint conference. I was impressed by the joint consensus statement on transition periods. While that's not actual research, it is peer-reviewed literature, and they came together and did a nice review of literature on the topic and provided some guidelines to the industry. And I thought that was really cool, and really believe that more of that could happen. And I might just ask, like, on broad issues facing athlete health and performance, if there was another joint consensus that came out, and I'll throw this at Dr. Ivey since he's the president of the CSCCA. If there was another joint consensus statement that came out with what's on the horizon in collegiate athletics, professional, or the profession of strength conditioning, maybe what would that statement be about?
I will go back to the first thing that I think Tim talked about here on this podcast. He talked about the long-term athletic development model. And for me, I have questions about how do we continue to pursue that with the transfer portal, with athletes that have been at multiple other schools, and what their experience might be. I think that's something that the NFL is curious about as well, or NBA or other WNBA, other professional organizations. They're they have to be concerned about the long-term athletic development model. I'm thinking that the NBA is probably going to be looking more internationally because of the long-term athletic development of those athletes, rather than our athletes who may be chasing at this point in time, their opportunities for NIL and whatever that might be. So I have concerns about that. What does that look like? So I guess, Tim, what do you think? I don't know if I answered Ernie's question. I'm taking it in a different direction, but when I wrote that down, when you said it, I was like, how do we do that now? How do we move forward?
That's a great question. So NSCA just elected a new president within the last year or so, Ian Jeffries, and I think it's really interesting. And I think Brent Alvar did a great job as president as well. But Ian Jeffries obviously brings some of that international flavor as well. So to your point, Pat, when it comes to the like NCAA athletes are those that are being focused on or recruited internationally. I think he would have an interesting take on that as well. But the opportunity to do consensus statements and move things forward that way, I know people are all for it, because anytime there's a consensus statement on whether it's return to play or because I know that was Ernie, that was the one I think you mentioned previously, or transition periods or something like that. I think it's really important that we all take a similar stance on that, instead of just standing in our own silos and saying, well, this is the way we do it, or this is the way we do it. It's those big topic issues are definitely things that consensus statements, in my opinion, should happen together. And I think there's an appetite for it. Once there's one consensus statement, we're kind of like, well, what's the next one? I'm going to put this out as an example. The NSCA has various position stands, which are great, but at the same time, if those were able to be consensus statements as well, with additional organizations, I also think that would speak volumes to kind of a common mindset of how to best implement certain things. So I think that would certainly be in the future, just more conversations with kind of the leaders of different organizations, yourself, Ian, within the NSCA, and obviously, like, even you could go internationally with some of the organizations, with the Australian Strength and Conditioning Association or the UK SCA. So all of these organizations are doing good things. They just need to, if we could have almost like a world consensus statement, for lack of a better term, I think it'd be great and moving things forward. So I have a question for Ted. With the experience and everything that you have, and I'm kind of taking things a different direction as well. We talk about the development of strength and conditioning coaches, especially with the students coming through. With your experience, where do you see the lack of development, and kind of where the upcoming students and strength and conditioning coaches really need to hone in on compared to what they have in the past?
I would say probably getting used to dealing with individuals relative to this portal issue, and having guys that are, what was it, the tight end for Miami of Florida, what was this, his 9th year? He's had 3 medical years. Is dealing with these individuals that have other types of medical conditions, or that you're dealing with somebody that's going to be playing full time, but they're just not completely healthy. But that's normal for them. And so I think sometimes that's an area that sometimes is not addressed a lot in the curriculum that you have at school. Is that, or you have somebody that's coming in and they've had torn ruptured left Achilles tendon, a blown out right ACL. How do we program for that individual within a team setting? This isn't a rehab setting. How do we program for that individual to maximize their strength, power, development, instead of training them like they're still injured? So I think that's probably one area that I could see where there probably needs to be, probably more emphasis in the curriculum to, to teach those younger strength coaches. And I know you did a great job with an article this past year looking at some of the, force plate metrics to utilize in different aspects of the training process. And I know I've shared that with, several, strength coaches that say, hey, what should we look at? So this was a great article because you just give some people, some great advice and guidelines to follow that are implement athlete monitoring using, the force plates. But I think that type of information where you're providing information on monitoring a normal, healthy individual, and then somebody that's on a return to play. And then this way they have a very good visualization of their programming. And I think more of that information is probably necessary. And I'll have a question for you with regard to that. Let's just say that I'm at a high school, or let's just say a Division III program that has minimal resources. How can I do some of that athlete monitoring if I don't have, say, a big budget for technology?
Sure. I mean, having come from that location, just recently, you have a lot of different things at your disposal. I mean, the reality is, not everyone can afford force plates. Not everyone can afford timing gates and those types of things. I mean, monitoring starts with pencil and paper, honestly. You can do a lot of monitoring of what happens in the weight room. I mean, anytime you're writing down sets, reps, weight, you're monitoring. But being able to keep track of, obviously, the more you can monitor without disruption of their, their natural, day-to-day schedule and everything, obviously the better. There's questionnaires, there's, rate your quality of sleep, like those types of things. Those are easy, low hanging fruit. But at the same exact time, to see the actual performance changes, we've done things with, we didn't do this at Carroll. Thankfully, we had some budget allowances at Carroll. But, we've used everything from a jump mat to a Vertec. And even in practice, it was, here's this piece of chalk. I want you to jump and put a mark on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
I see Pat nodding up and down. He's like, yeah, we did that. But we even used sticky notes. He's like, you write your initials on and you jump up and you put your sticky note on the wall. Now, jump height is not the be all end all in terms of metrics, because we obviously want to know how someone, achieved that jump. But at the same time, there are different types of jumps as well. So how, what distance did you cover in a broad jump? What distance did you cover in a three horizontal jump repeating jump? If you have something like a jump mat, you can get things like reactive strength index. You can get, you can do a 5 jump test or a 3 jump test and actually get, their time on the ground. And a lot of that is going to give you a lot of insight on, from a fatigue standpoint, neuromuscular fatigue, how well or not well all those systems inside are actually working. But for me, there's, again, it goes back to pencil and paper. What are they doing in the weight room? Are they continuing to, improve their weights? Are they, you won't necessarily be able to say, are they moving them faster? But at the same time, if you can see that, this is the coaching aspect of it. Can you visually see that it's moving faster? I'll ask Ernie a question about technology here in a second. But the reality is, I feel like a lot of younger strength and conditioning coaches that come up with a lot of technology, they're used to staring at a screen instead of the athlete, versus having the screen supplement their coaching. So, I'll use GymAware as an example. I love GymAware. We use it for research, we use it for monitoring, but at the same time, I don't care what the number is on the screen if the technique is garbage. That's the one issue that I have, recurring issue with velocity-based training. It's like, well, they moved it faster. And I'm like, that's great, but what did it look like? Because if someone compromised technique just to move things faster, did we really improve? So I think I answered your question. I think there's a variety of different things that we can do. So Ernie, curious, can you speak to kind of the direction that you see technology going when it comes to monitoring athletes, and kind of benefits and limitations to both things.
Yeah, sure. It's a topic I love to talk about because the conundrum with technology is that because so many technologies are subscription based now, it creates this need to want to use that technology all the time. And previously, when we were able to purchase technologies outright, like there was a time when force plates were a one-off purchase. And now you have this tool forever and you can use it when you want to. And so I think there's this constant urge to have to use your technology all the time. But I think you said it best. You want to be able to monitor athletes without it taking up a whole lot of time on the athletes, or in a way you want to be able to monitor invisibly. And I think that technology, when used at appropriate times, can help us accomplish that invisible monitoring to help understand where the athletes are at different times. But where I see technology possibly having a bigger role would be in what we might call the new realm of collegiate athletics, with some of the different court cases that have come through and some changes that we're expecting to affect the financial well-being of athletic departments. I do believe that if technology is meant to make us more efficient, then it's going to have a significant role when we might have staff, equipment, and other facility shortfalls due to what might be coming. So I actually think that it could be really, really important in the near future. But I might just, I'm going to pivot real quick, and don't mean to, because I like where this is heading, but I want to go back to LTAD, long-term athlete development. And I suppose this is a little bit selfish because I am now coaching really young children. But when I hear long-term athlete development, I think about, from youth all the way into high school, college, and professional ranks. So ultimately, how do you develop an athlete from the early childhood ages all the way into becoming that elite athlete? So I'm curious to know, Tim, if you have come across any research, maybe things you've taught in college courses that can call upon, like, what are some of the guiding or leading approaches or philosophies around long-term athlete development, monitoring from the early childhood ages in order to help them be, equip them to be successful and probably be able to take the step from high school, maybe into college athletics, and eventually college into Olympic or professional ranks?
Sure. Yeah, that's a big question and a hot topic of everything. First and foremost, let me just say that lifting is not dangerous when done appropriately with every single age group. So I don't have kids personally, but I have a niece and nephew, and I've seen them jump off a lot of things. Some of the heights that they're jumping off of, I would never prescribe as a box jump for any of my athletes. And so the reality is, they haven't developed, real bones yet. They're still in the process of doing that. So being able to prescribe appropriately for these individuals is really important. That being said, from a monitoring standpoint, the primary things that I'm concerned about are movement and movement quality. So obviously developing the different skills, going back to the basic movement skills. Can they walk? Can they jog? Can they skip? Can they jump? Like variety of different, can they crawl? Like all of those different things. But that being, moving on from that, it's can they do it in a pattern, in a specific manner? So if I change the constraint with them, what does the movement quality start to look like? So for me, it goes back to, motor development. If I can teach someone at an early age to perform a movement well, but then being able to then add weight to it or add different constraints to it to make to challenge them a little bit, that is something that I feel like is, in my opinion, under monitored. So again, why, I guess here's a question that's kind of rhetorical, but why do we get athletes in college that move poorly? it's because they weren't taught properly at a younger age. Now, again, there's obviously different physical limitations that some people have. There's obviously different constraints that some people have. You may just also have really bad coaches that didn't put in the time. I remember showing up to my weight room in high school and seeing a program on the board that the football coach wrote and said, or the other classic example is, you see that person doing a clean over there? Do that. We know it's not that simple, but at the same exact time, putting in the effort to actually develop these kids at a younger age, you don't have to be able to clean first. You can, being able to perform a hip hinge, being able to perform a squat, with decent technique, being able to pick something up off the floor without having a camel's hump for your back, like those types of things, are all things that we need to develop. But, again, getting back to the question, the long-term monitoring of movement quality is, in my opinion, paramount, because once we have the movement quality, then we can teach someone through resistance training or through different skill-based work how to apply force appropriately and effectively. So being able to, every single task that we have, whether it's a squat, whether it's sprinting, whether it's hitting a baseball or anything like that, each one of those is an individual motor skill. They need to be able to produce force within that necessary time constraint, within those movement patterns. But you can't do that until you start to develop at a really young age. And so teaching someone quality movement at a younger age is really important, but then adding different constraints so they can essentially find the, for lack of a better term, motor program that's going to help them solve the problem or the constraint that they're in. So that's the approach that I would take. Very, very broad approach. I've been talking to Sophia Nymphius a lot. So
yeah.
Hey, Ernie, with regard to this long-term athletic development, and looking at your situation with a potential really great baseball player on the horizon there in your household, do you feel that if he decides he wants to play baseball year round, that would help or hinder his long-term athletic development rather than engaging in other sports? So the sports specialization, topic from a father and as well as a researcher, what's your opinion?
Yeah. Well, thank you for putting the ball on the tee, pun intended. So for the audience, I'm coaching a group of kids who are 6 and 7 years old, and they're a baseball team, and they're pretty good. It's a year-round team, and I'm sure many people have heard of the AAU and the travel ball phenomenon, and AAU in basketball and travel ball and baseball and things like that. And we're approaching this as I'm calling it a travel academy rather than a travel team, because my approach and what I have come to believe in, based on what the research is suggesting, and maybe I have bias, is that I want kids to continue to sample sports. So I would prefer that these kids play as many sports as possible throughout the year, and to be able to develop their athleticism under different constraints, like Tim mentioned. And so for my current approach, we promote playing different sports. We have a very big team roster to allow the flexibility of the kids to play their different sports. So we currently have kids who are football players, soccer players, martial artists, and they also play on other baseball teams. And we want to continue to promote that. And I think that if my son decided he wanted to just specialize in baseball, and if he was at too early of an age, I would still make sure that he's involved in other types of sports to continue to develop a more versatile athletic profile for him. The other aspect that the research would suggest is that the reason kids do this isn't to win. And so I've been spending a lot of time trying to learn how to create a very engaging environment that allows the structure of the practices and games to be fun and engaging, but allows them to learn the more advanced concepts of the sport. And there's probably been a lot more time spent on how to interact with the parents who want to see their investment come to life in their kids' playing time, their kids' statistics, or the scoreboard. And so I've been spending a lot of time diving into those concepts and reviewing research, and also using resources like Dr. Ivey, who is a performance psychologist, and he has his PhD in sports psychology. So I've definitely had a few lunches with him about how I can engage kids and about how we can engage parents. So I might go ahead and just put that in Dr. Ivey's, put the bat in Dr. Ivey's hands, so to speak. And just, Dr. Ivey, could you talk to us a little bit about, like, for the youth coaches out there who are trying to develop athletes and create an environment that might help those athletes learn and engage and grow, and maybe someday become a very high level athlete past high school? Like, what's the environment that we need to create from the research? What would the research say is the environment that we need to create in any youth sport from a coaching standpoint, or with the way that the parents interact with their kids and the team?
So I appreciate that. And this kind of ties in because long-term athletic development, their motivation and intrinsic motivation of an athlete is a part of that process. If an athlete loses motivation along the way, we know that's going to have a detrimental impact on their performance and their career. But it's the same way with the physical development, right? If there's overuse injuries, or if you're playing something year round and you specialize early in a sport and that's all you do, and you don't develop the necessary balance and athleticism, we're setting our athletes up for what we've all experienced working with some athletes, burnout. Whether that's emotional, physical, mental, it's a real thing. What the research has shown, and I learned this in one of my sports psychology classes, Dr. Rick McGuire, he's a track coach for 27 years, and then he was the director of sports psychology, was also a professor for over 20 or 30 years, and had probably 100 doctoral students underneath him. So someone that really gets it. He decided in a class that I was taking towards the end of his career that he would finally write a book. The title of the book is Winning Kids with Sport, as opposed to winning sport with kids. And I think that's our approach a lot of times, is to win sport with kids. And then what Ernie's trying to do with his Little League team is to win these kids with sport. And the number one attribute that we came away with, that we were taught in this class based on research, number one reason kids play sport is for fun. It seems like I would guess that even a lot of professionals play the game because it's fun. Obviously, they're making a career and they're making millions of dollars doing it. Now college athletes are now making 6-7 figures doing it. But I think if we can keep that at the center of our planning, of our periodization, if we can periodize fun and incorporate that into hard work and teamwork and leadership, and like, you can make all of those things fun. And obviously the fun looks a little bit different when you're working with the 6-7-year-olds that Ernie's working with versus the athletes that have been in college for now 6 or 7 years. The fun may look a little different. Even professional, you go to an NFL, NBA locker room, those guys are in there, those girls, they're in there having fun in the locker room. They're having fun at practice. They'll find ways to make it fun. So I want to do something that would be fun to me right now, and that is to possibly try to start an argument with Tim. And here's where I want to start an argument, Tim. And so I won't say which side of the argument I'm on. I'm on both, actually. But in terms of hip speed versus bar speed, thinking about that. So the hips exploding versus the speed of the bar. And we're talking about athleticism in sport. All right. And then think of it in the context of velocity-based training, compromised technique with a hang clean. So if I say, hey, Tim, I don't care about the technique. All I care about is the hip speed or the bar speed. And I don't care about the catch phase of the clean. I want them producing force because that's what I want out on the field. And you say, well, I think we can have technique. And I said, I don't care about technique. I'm going to go old school coach on you. And I want that bar moving fast and I want those hips popping. What do you say? Can you start an argument with me on that?
How long do you have? No, no. I mean, I get this argument all the time. Is well, they made the lift, didn't they? I was like, well, of course they made the lift, but if we're moving a certain way and developing poor movement patterns that are going to translate into something else, I'm going to use an example. Really fast hips during a clean. Generally speaking, movement with a clean in the hips is meant to be, it's extension of the hips, but it is in the vertical movement. But you get people who hip the cleans all the time that are going to push them away from them, and then the bar comes back towards them almost like a reverse curl. And you see that all the time. The problem with that is you're actually generating force in a different direction. So you want to generate force, that's great. Let's generate it in the right direction. So that's part of my argument. The second part of it is going back to the velocity side of things. I would actually say with bar speed for a team sport athlete may not actually be the most important thing. We actually just had a paper accepted looking at weightlifting movements, looking at the differences between barbell velocity and center of mass velocity or system velocity. And they're vastly different. So if you look at, for example, the barbell velocity of a jump shrug and a hang high pull, both of them end up being peak barbell velocity about 3 meters per second, right around there. If you were then to take the exact same loads that those were performed at and look at center of mass velocity, you'll notice that the jump shrug is still really high. It's like 2.5 meters per second, something like that, compared to the hang high pull drops below 2 meters per second. So what happened? How did you actually generate the velocity? The velocity of the hang high pull comes from the displacement of the barbell because it's pulled so high. The barbell velocity that comes from the jump shrug is because it is a ballistic movement that someone pushed off the ground as hard as possible to jump as high as possible. So again, this is a weird question to ask, but I've asked coaches this before. What velocity is important? They're like, well, we want the bar to be moving fast. I'm like, well, that's great. Bar can move fast, but it's going to move fast because of what the body is doing, not necessarily what the bar, or sorry, only the bar is moving. Because you can make the argument, if I push the bar farther away from me, if you're using a Tendo unit, it's going to tell you that it's just as fast. But if you're using a GymAware, it's going to tell you that it's slower because it's moving only vertical, or calculating only vertical. So I don't know if I totally went the direction you wanted me to go with on that, but movement quality, obviously, what force do you need and what direction do you need to produce it in? Obviously, if I'm talking about someone like a football lineman, I need you to be able to produce a lot of vertical force, but also produce some horizontal force into the person who's running into you, because otherwise you're going to get run over. At the same exact time, if I'm talking about someone like a high jumper who may not necessarily use weightlifting movements all the time, but maybe they do, you're looking at vertical force almost exclusively because you are trying to get up and over a bar. Yes, you are moving into it at an angle, obviously, so there's still going to be some horizontal force being produced. But our ability the transfer of these movements is going to be based on what, a concept that we call dynamic correspondence. Does it look like it? Does it produce similar forces? Is it done in the same time period? Variety of those characteristics. So I would say you're chasing the right things with force production, but we need to chase them in that will apply directly to your sport more than what poor technique may actually transfer for.
That was pretty good.
So I mean, going along with that, I mean, you can make that argument with, we often have arguments about the weightlifting movements in general. So people often ask me with my research, Tim, you do a lot of pulling derivative research. Are you anti-catch? No, I'm not anti-catch, but I want individuals to develop a quality movement pattern so that the movement of the pole itself is moving towards the catch. I'd also make the argument that if you don't drop the bar during a pull, yes, there is still a load acceptance phase. So there's a load acceptance phase in anything that we do. But at the same exact time, I also get people who will say, well, we perform the catch phase because it mimics getting hit in football or an impact or something like that. And coach, you know better than anybody. What simulates getting hit in football? Getting hit in football.
Getting hit. That's
now, unless Ernie and I are going to stand on both sides of a barbell and run at one of you and then throw it at you, we're probably not simulating getting hit in football in the weight room ever. So that being said, I'd also make the argument that eccentric training methods, your accentuated eccentric loading, your just as one example, that's what those are for, is developing those braking characteristics. And you do them with accelerated eccentrics, accentuated eccentric loading, flywheel, tempo stuff. There's a variety of different things you can use. Weightlifting movements exist on that spectrum. But coach, I'll give either of you these. So Pat, Ted, if you want to chime in, why do you feel like we're so polarized when we choose or when we advocate for certain movements or advocate against certain movements? And the couple examples that I'll use are weightlifting movements and something like the hex bar jump.
Ted, you want to take it first?
I think it's what you're trying to accomplish with the lifts. And to your point, is watching the individual execute the lift. I've had individuals that, had unbelievable hang clean technique and could catch without any problem. I had thick chested guys with shorter arms, and the catch was a problem. So we would minimize, the inefficiencies of the catch portion of the exercise. But when we look at the execution of, say, a triple extension movement and try to make the learning curve as simple as possible, a hex bar jump or a jump shrug would sort of suffice what we were looking for, the exercise quality, without having to spend extra time on individuals that we maybe are only going to be training for 3 months before they get cut or move on to another school. So it's one of those situations where it's not anti this, but it's just being realistic with the situation that you're what you're dealt with. That answer your question?
Yeah.
So I would say, going back 25 years ago, when I first got started in the profession, so I'm from Michigan, and up in Michigan, HIIT training was really big up there. And that's HIIT with one eye, because now we have high intensity interval training with 2 eyes. So just HIIT training, high intensity training. Then there was people that was powerlifting. And then there was Olympic lifting dominated regions of the country. And then there was strongman that was really getting popular. Obviously, bodybuilding was really popular in some certain parts of the country. And then there became this military type training. And it really came down to whose program could beat the other's program. So whose team could beat the other's team. And so it became a thing where, you don't want to go a place where they're Olympic lifting dominant, because those who won the national championship most recently do more of a hybrid between powerlifting and Olympic lifting. So that became the argument between programs and strength coaches and football programs predominantly, 25 years ago. So I think some of that still exists today, where people want to say, well, the way I do things leads to more results on the field or court or in the pool. And I don't think it's as dominant of an argument as it used to be, but I know that it still exists because now, because CrossFit has entered, who's more of a CrossFit type program, and there's no way they're strong enough if they're just focused on doing muscle ups. And so it's always some program or someone trying to put someone else down so that they can be lifted up and be seen better and be thought of as a leader in the industry based on the success of the program that you're associated with. So I think that's why a lot of that argument exists. I was always taught to teach what you know, but keep learning.
Yep.
And if your background just so happens to be more in powerlifting and you don't know how to coach the Olympic lifts, well, you can bring some people on your staff that know how to coach the Olympic lifts, or you can just really focus and be really good at what you do and try to move those weights as fast as you can. So I think there's the more successful coaches and programs, they can adapt, they can take bits and pieces of what's out there and make it fit. And I'll stop right there.
Yeah, no, I mean, just to round this out, I personally just believe, and I all my students that I've ever worked with, whether it's a programming method, whether it is a different types of exercises, I personally think every up and coming strength coach, and even the existing strength coaches now, should at least continue to read, two, get exposed to as much as possible, because these are, in reality, these are all just tools in the toolbox. It's not you have to use these, it's that you have an opportunity to potentially use these, especially if you have them as a novel training stimulus. The reality is a lot of the athletes become so stagnant, especially if we do the same thing over and over and over again. Especially at the advanced level, they need something new to kind of get past that plateau that they may experience. So we talked about this at the beginning of the conversation with some of the long-term athlete development, where they get stuck to the point where they may develop freshman, sophomore into junior year, but then they plateau. And the obvious issue with that is with the athletes that need to get to that next level, they need to be introduced to something that's going to allow them to adapt, that's new to them. Because if we continue to do the same thing, we talk about the definition of insanity all the time. You're not going to get new results if you continue to do the exact same thing all the time.
I agree with you. I agree. I don't know why Ernie disagrees with you, though. That's what I don't know.
Am I nodding my head in disagreement? When I hear this conversation, it just makes me think of something that I feel is a lost art, and it's the needs analysis. And I do feel like when we think about like developing strength and conditioning coaches, annual plans, needs analyses, like it's a lost art. And the needs analysis is really trying to understand the activity demands of a sport, what physical characteristics or traits do you need to be successful in the sport. And so at the end of the day, like there are there's reasons from a motor standpoint why we teach certain things in strength conditioning, but we're trying to elicit adaptations. So which neuromuscular or cardiovascular adaptations are we seeking? And this is probably one of the most valuable lessons I learned during my PhD in exercise phys, is that as long as the training elicits the adaptation that we seek, then it's fair game. And so to me, that eliminates the argument between powerlifter stance, to catch or not to catch a pull, to do split squats versus double leg. What are the adaptations that we're trying to get from the athlete? If it's max force production, how do we need to train athletes in order to get maximum strength? If it's velocity of muscle shortening, what types of training can elicit adaptations that allow for greater velocity of muscle shortening? And so that's what I think about. And then when you look at more of the cardiovascular, are you looking for central adaptations versus peripheral? respiratory adaptations? And if so, what type of training can elicit those adaptations? And then can you see that in the way that you're testing your athletes to see if those are coming to light? So for me, all of a sudden, upon like kind of that realization and going back to the basic level of physiology, muscle phys and cardiovascular physiology, it kind of made me think like it's all fair game. Focus, do the needs analysis, reverse engineer that, focus on the adaptations you seek, and then it's all fair game. And so that would be my answer. And so now pretty much anything goes as long as we know what the adaptations we're trying to get out of it. So I'll digress there. But the other thing too, I know we talked a lot about movement quality and exercise technique. And I suppose to Dr. Ivey's argument, like if, who cares what the technique is as long as that velocity, that barbell velocity is there. Like sometimes I think that if you have such great movement quality, sometimes it might be changing your technique because you can change your technique because it's within your movement abilities. You can go to this technical strategy because you can, not because it's the only way my body allows me to move. So, but I'll throw it over to Ted. Ted, I know you like to close us out with one last question.
Yeah, Tim, could you suggest, and this doesn't have to be, professional reading materials within your academic expertise, but it could be anything that you feel improves you as a professional. Any reading suggestions for our listeners?
Ooh, I mean, I'm a wide, I was going to say I'm an open book, but that would be a bad pun intended right here. But there's a variety of things I like to read. I also like to just read a lot of novels just to get out of the sports science realm just a little bit. But I know a book that I'll certainly recommend. It's a slightly difficult one. It makes you think, but I know it's near and dear to Dr. Ivey's heart, is Thinking Fast and Slow. I'm still working my way through that one. It was a recommendation that I've gotten from a variety of people. I do really think that there is some upcoming textbooks that are going to be on the horizon as well. I know that for example, updates to the Essentials textbook for the strength and conditioning is coming up. I know they're working on the 5th edition right now. But I also would recommend to a variety of people is we need to get back to some of the basics when it comes to understanding kind of where we are now. I think it's funny when I either get asked to write something or recommend reading recommendation, there's some of the students will say, well, that's so old. That was back in the 90s or the 80s. I was like, yeah, but it's really good. And that's why I'm recommending it to you. So, and again, I realize this isn't necessarily a book, but going back to some of the classic physiology work and understanding, Ernie was talking about kind of obviously chasing the adaptation. Well, we need to understand what the adaptation is actually going to do for us. One of the classic books that I have is I want to say it's like the Encyclopedia of it's like Strength and Power or something like that. It was Comey, PV Comey was Pavel Comey. But that's lived on. Yep, Ernie's going to pull it out. Yes, those. There's a variety of volumes of those that are classic. The authors in there are people that we all should know, in my opinion, just because it gives us a lot of that foundational knowledge. Also, Golden Age of Strength and Conditioning. I really think it's a valuable piece if you haven't read it yet. I really like that. I hope that we continue to put out new or other volumes of that just to get people within our world a little more exposure to kind of where our roots came from.
I agree with that, Tim. Appreciate you being on this podcast. If you would agree, would you come back and join us later when you get your feet under you a little more there at Pittsburgh.
100% love this. I'll happily do this again.
Absolutely. Well, we appreciate you. Any closing thoughts before we close this one out?
I know, like I said, I really think this is valuable. I honestly believe that a lost art is actually communication and talking with people. As much as we like to text and how simple it is, having a conversation like this, I feel like opens more dialogue. Anytime I go to conferences or anything like that, I get more out of conversations with people and sometimes in the hallways than what I do sitting in some of the lectures. Now, I'm not discouraging people from going to the lectures, just to be clear, but these types of conversations are always valuable. I'd also mention that the more exposure you can get to people who you always read about, talk to all the time, go ask them a question. That's what I would say.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Doctors Ernie, Ted, Tim. Appreciate you all so much. This has been a really good one. And with that one, everyone have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thanks.